11 after 7 on to this now, hot off the press. Midnight release. In the darkness of the night, Treasury released a statement that in fact the previously announced VAT increase due to come into effect on the 1st of May will now be reversed. To hike or not to hike has been the question. You'll recall the DA and the EFF have taken the VAT hike issue to court, citing procedural flaws. In fact, it was the DA Federal Council Chair, Helen Zille, who tweeted last night that lawyers representing Treasury had reached out to them wanting an out-of-court settlement. We've got one of the first people to get this news out on social media. Khaya Sithole is a columnist and analyst. Khaya, always a pleasure to have you on the show. This is quite a major U-turn.
Yes, morning and good morning to the listeners. So I think it is indeed quite a momentous occasion. And what makes it particularly momentous is that after so many months of the wrangling between and forth, we not only have a budget that has to be redrafted, but a serious credibility crisis for National Treasury and the Finance Minister, given where we started, about how insistent that they were, that this was the only answer, and for us to have ended up here will lead to a lot of questions about, well, what else have they perhaps miscalculated in the drafting of national public finances?
After the first version, the Finance Minister was quite adamant that this is not a process he does by committee. Well, look at us now.
Yes, and I think what we've done is that historically it's obviously been run with the ANC being fully in charge of the process from start to finish. So in the practices, become embedded in the process of deciding who sits on the committee that works on the technical drafts, who gets to negotiate with the different departments, trying to find out what they expect to see. Those are the processes that need to be revisited because clearly they were not as inclusive and as widely consultative as they needed to be. So everyone then said they were being ambushed when the initial draft of the budget was mooted for presentation in February.
But let's not forget the numbers, because what we are now hearing from Treasury officials is they're saying the scrapping of this value-added tax will leave them with a 75 billion rand hole over the next 3 years. And also, notwithstanding the fact that some of those projections were made before all the Trump noise and everything else that has transpired since was considered.
Yeah, it is problematic because you probably have three extremes that we've heard from now. So in the initial budget, the gap was said to be around 58 billion rand, which justified the 2% request. In the second iteration, we heard that at 0.5%, you would be able to raise around 13.5 billion, but there would still be a gap, and that gap was only going to be addressed by some other adjustments to the expenditure items. So now that we're hearing that there's a 75 billion rand hole, the question that was always there is how the money will be found and how will this be funded. And when finance ministers have to deal with these things, they only have three things available at their arsenal. They can either borrow more, they can raise taxes, or they can cut spending. We do know that the minister is adamant that he doesn't want to borrow more, and the evidence backs him up there. We already are over indebted. Now that the tax hikes are off the table, then the third option is a simple one of where can you cut? And I think historically our political parties and political principles are not keen on cutting spending. But in this instance, everybody's hand has been forced. And until somebody finds a new windfall in the form of revenue, and the SARS has said that there's something that they could find, we are going to have to deal with the difficult question of until new revenues come, ensure we cannot spend as we were spending before, so we cannot retain the baseline expenditures that everybody thought they were entitled to.
How much will our economy be in the doldrums? I think now the figure for debt to GDP ratio is at 88%, at least is the projection in the coming years.
Well, it only depends on whether the minister does indeed carry on borrowing. And I think the danger here is that everybody acknowledges that while borrowing is indeed an elegant and an immediate solution, there's enough machinistas all across the world. The problem is that the cost of that borrowing have to be funded. And those costs of borrowing are already over 400 billion rand a year, and they have now displaced every other item on the budget. So we're already spending a lot of money just paying the interest, not even the capital on how much you've borrowed already. So if we do go and borrow more, it simply means that we're condemning future generations to dealing with the crisis of today. And that's always been the problem statement here, in that at some point in time, somebody has to say, well, we have to deal with the crisis as it is now instead of kicking it down the can, which is what we've done for over 15 years.
All right, Khaya Sithole, looking at the numbers, the rands and cents, if you will. Somebody who's no doubt going to have a view on the political fallout from all of this is Professor Richard Calland, who joins us now from the Wits School of Governance. Prof, this process is in complete disarray now, is it not?
Yes, Bongani, good morning to you. I think this is the culmination of a rather dramatic political story that began on that unprecedented afternoon at the end of February when the Finance Minister could not present his budget. And so in a sense, this is the inevitable, perhaps, playing out of that story. It means, unfortunately, he is greatly weakened. I say unfortunately because it doesn't lend credibility and strength to kind of South Africa's position as a credible budget organising government. It undermines that. And of course, the related story, there's two dimensions to this, Bongani, as you're well aware. There's the fiscal and budgetary considerations that you just discussed with Khaya Sithole, but there's also the political story related to the future of the Government of National Unity and specifically the continued participation of the DA within that GNU.
So, this was the contentious issue around whether or not the GNU would stay in its current form and what it might look like going forward. So if there's a reversal on the key issue that the DA simply would not budge on, does that give you any optimism then that perhaps behind the scenes, the two big parties in this coalition might find some common ground?
Well, this aspect of the story unfolded late last night. Most people will not yet have perhaps seen this, but the ANC, along with 9 other political parties, excluding the DA, intend to hold a press conference this morning at which they talk about constructive engagement and having reached agreement in relation to the VAT climb down. Now, what's really curious about this, which your question alludes to, Bongani, is that, of course, the DA made it clear that they were willing to die in the ditch in relation to the VAT increase. In a sense, they got that's what they've always wanted, but they're not part of the political kind of coalition that is now going to present that as the new face of the government position. Now, it's not yet clear whether that means the DA is being kicked out and that the ministers will be fired, the DA ministers will be fired, or whether it's simply a mechanism to enable the ANC to not hand this as a victory on a plate to the DA.
So what now in terms of the process that must be followed? Budget 3.0?
Well, for sure. The parliamentary process has to adapt to this situation now, as the Finance Minister's Treasury's statement issued this morning makes clear. He has to withdraw his current proposals. The legislation in relation to both revenue and expenditure has to be changed to reflect this new reality, and the budget has to be reshuffled, and that has to be done very rapidly if credibility is and a sense of certainty about the future is to be sustained.
What are the next steps? Parliament, as I understand it, is in recess at the moment. You've almost got to go back and restart the process entirely from scratch, or where do we pick it up to make sure this gets over the line as quickly as possible?
Well, I think market and business confidence and sentiment this morning will be interesting to watch, and that's related not just to the question about how the government is going to fill this fiscal hole in the way that you were just discussing, but also in relation to the composition of the government, of the coalition government. And those two things are related, as we've discussed. And I think on both fronts, both the government and the political leadership of the country are going to have to move quite fast this morning to reassure a range of stakeholders, the public, the media, but also, importantly, the corporate and investor and market stakeholders.
All right, Professor Richard Calland, appreciate your time. So there could yet be a reconfiguration then of the Government of National Unity. Will it be with the DA or without the party in blue? Whose victory is it, if it is one at all? It's all unfolding at breakneck speed.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.